Alright, so this video, let's look at factoring perfect square trinomials. So, what we have to do is determine if it's a perfect square trinomial. So, if you have three terms, okay, the way that we see it's a perfect square trinomial to where it factors in, with the parentheses squared. Alright, so what we do is we look at this first term and this last term. And the square root of the first term, the square root of a squared is a, the square root of b squared is b. So if you can multiply those together and then multiply that times 2 and get the middle term, it's in this form. And that means that it can factor into this. So you square root, multiply them together, and then times 2, and you get this middle term. That means it's in this form. And then you can see when we factor it, it's just the parentheses squared, and then it's the square root of this, which is a, this sign right here, and then the square root of the last term, b. Okay, and this is the same thing, the square root of this sign, and the square root of the last term. Alright, so let's look at some examples. Alright, so here we go. Let's look at this first term. What's the square root of x squared? That's x. What's the square root of 36? 6. What do we get when we multiply them together? 6x. And then times 2, that gives us 12x, which is the middle term. So that means that we can factor this with the parentheses squared. Alright, so here we go. The square root of this, of x squared, is x, this sign, and the square root of the last term. And there's your answer. Alright, let's look at the next one. The square root of x squared is x, square root of 49 is 7. Multiply them together, we get 7x times 2, that's 14x, which is the middle term. So that tells us it factors into this. It's a perfect square trinomial. So the square root of the first term, x, this sign, and square root of the last term. And there it is. Alright, let's take a look at, we got 3 more to do. Alright, so let's look at the first term. The square root of this is the square root of 4x squared is 2x. Square root of 9 is 3. Multiply them together. That is 6x. Multiply that times 2. That gives us 12x. That is our middle term. Alright, so that factors. It's a perfect square trinomial. Square root of 4x squared is 2x. This sign, and then square root of the last term. And there's your answer. Oh, and I should mention, which I didn't mention before, notice in the formula that this sign back here, the last sign, is always positive. If it's negative, then it's not a perfect square trinomial. It has to be positive. Alright, let's get back to our examples. Alright, so let's look at this. Alright, the square root of 25x squared is 5x. Square root of 16 is 4. Multiply these together. That gives you 20x. Multiply that times 2. That's 40x. And that's our middle term. So it's a perfect square trinomial. Alright, so square root of 25x squared is 5x. This sign, and square root of the last term. Square root of 16 is 4. Alright, so let's take a look at our last problem. Alright, so let's look at the first term. Square root of 8x squared. Well, 8's not a perfect square. The last term, 18, is not a perfect square either. But if you notice, we can factor out a 2. So this is 2 times, and that would be 4x squared minus 12x, plus 12x plus 9. Alright, so now let's look at this. Okay, square root of the first term is 2x. Square root of the last term is 3. Multiply them together, you get 6x. Multiply that times 2, you get 12x, which that's our middle term. So this is a perfect square trinomial. And we do have the 2 out here. Well, all that means is 2 is just going to come along for the ride. So that's going to be 2, and then this factored is going to be the parentheses squared. So it's the square root of 4x squared, which is 2x, this sign, which is plus, and the square root of the last term, 3, square root of 9. Alright, and there's your answer. Alright, so hopefully this video helped. If you like it, you can watch my other videos and subscribe. Alright, thanks.